human rights and other elements of on the social side of ESG. And the team that I lead also does all of our public disclosures on ESG. So we have our ESG performance report that we put out each year, our TCFD report, which is our deeper technical dive into climate change report, a Modern Slavery Act statement, and some other publications that we put out. But our team works across the enterprise with the business units, and we're trying to drive, how we can use sustainability to drive revenue growth at RBC, and how can we help our clients navigate the low carbon transition and a sustainable future. So that's really why we exist. And we are busy. There's so much going on in the organization. Yeah. And I'll pass it to Audrey, who's also on my team.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I'm a member of the sustainability team as well, and I manage environmental and social issues. And a big part of that is just engaging with our stakeholders on these issues and hearing their viewpoints and trying to drive change within the bank on the basis of, these kind of external considerations on environmental and social issues. And my background is actually in human rights law, so I have a strong kind of connection to the social side of the sustainability questions, and I lead our modern slavery disclosure as well.
Wonderful.
And I'll pass it to Andrew Block.
Sure. And thanks for meeting with us today too. We certainly appreciate the time. So my role is, I work within our corporate communications team, and really focus a lot on. So I sit within our investment banking team or support that group, and work actually quite closely with Andrew and Audrey on a lot of environmental issues, climate change, energy, all of those sorts of things. And so I think the three of us have been working closely together, and increasingly I've been trying to join meetings like this that Audrey and Andrew do, really because it's helpful to us to hear directly from you on what you're thinking, what you're hearing, and that helps us be responsive in how we communicate on these issues and talk about our approach, and make sure that feedback is getting to the right places as well. So I would say Audrey and Andrew are probably are the experts on a lot of this. So I'll probably be more just in listening mode, but we'll jump in here and there as needed.
That's great. Thank you all so much for that information, and for meeting with us today. Just a little bit of introduction to who we are and what we hope to get out of our meeting with you today. So GASP, Grandmothers Act to Save the Planet, is a grassroots nonpartisan group of grandmothers and grandothers. You don't have to be a grandmother to be part of our group. And we care passionately about the world our descendants will inherit. The climate emergency makes us fearful for the future of our grandchildren. If we do not radically change our ways, we will put their lives at risk. GASP has made a serious decision to do what it can to ensure we leave our grandchildren a healthy planet and a livable, equitable society. Since we started our correspondence with RBC back in August of 2020, RBC's responses haven't shown any sense of urgency that we are in a climate crisis. We are deeply concerned that our questions have not been answered with clear answers. We are deeply concerned that RBC hasn't provided definite targets for divestment in the fossil fuel projects. And we are deeply concerned that as one of Canada's top financial institutions, RBC hasn't stepped up to set the example for other Canadian banks and be the leader it could be by supporting renewable energy and stopping investing in fossil fuel projects. We have a couple of questions for you this morning, and I'd like to pass it over to Liz for our first question, if that's okay.
Good morning. I'm actually speaking to you from a little place called Erin, Ontario, which is up, if you go straight up Mississauga Road, it's close after about half an hour's drive. I'm a former teacher, and for the past 25 years, I've been really active in environmental issues, and certainly right from the very start, I knew that climate change was the big one, huge one. And from 25 years, actually the late 1980s, knowing that unless we acted really strongly and powerfully and boldly on this one, it was going to be either a catastrophe or we could make it. So we're kind of edging towards that catastrophe, unfortunately, because there hasn't been a whole lot of progress in the last 30 years. What started this for GASP was an article by Bill McKibben. You're probably familiar with him. He wrote the book, The End of Nature, way back in the late 80s. That started the conversation about climate change. And he had a 2019 story in the New Yorker called Money is the Oxygen in which the Fire of Global Warming Burns. And it was all about the financing of fossil fuels. So I read the story with great interest. I'm a big follower of Bill McKibben's, and kind of buried in a certain section of it was a statement that said, okay, the 2019 edition of Banking on Climate Change showed that 5 American banks, 2 Japanese banks, Barclays in England, were at the top in the top 10 of fossil fuel funders. And as he said in it, it rounded out by 3 Canadian banks, and actually at number 5, number 8, and number 9. So I looked at that and I thought, you know, we're not small players in this. This is a big play to when we're adding fuel to the fire of fossil fuels in a way that I couldn't comprehend. So we brought the issue to GASP and we started doing some more research and then got active by writing to all of the big banks, especially RBC, but also TP. So I guess I have a question for you, all of you. It's fairly simple. Are you also on board and agreeing that with the 2018 UN report on the special report that says we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by nearly 50% by 2030 to have a chance, even a 50-50 chance of staying under 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming? So
Before anybody answers, Liz, there's a lot of interference, and it's because this happens, I think, when, for example, we don't have it on our Zoom calls, but because RBC, you don't have Zoom. I've had this with other situations. Would it help if we all mute ourselves unless we're talking? There's a lot of background scraping and noises that make it.
Yeah, that would help.
It would help if we all mute ourselves unless we're talking. Okay.
Anyway, I don't know if you heard the question, but is RBC sort of in agreement with that very frightening report that came out in 2018, in October 2018, saying we have 12 years to get our GHG reductions below, 50%, 45%, but close enough to 50. Now here we are almost 3 years later, and we haven't made much progress. So I'm just wondering, from the scientific standpoint, are you in agreement with that conclusion by the UN?
Yeah, I can answer that, and I did hear the question clearly, Liz. So thank you for that. Yes, we are certainly a supporter of the principles of the Paris Agreement. The principles around not warming the planet any more than 2 degrees and striving for 1.5. We've made a public statement in this regard all the way back in 2017, actually, in our climate change position statement that we published then. So we are looking at, the science of climate change. I think that's really important. And also looking at the importance here nowadays is, some of these commitments that you're seeing organizations make around net zero by 2050. You highlighted that in a couple of your correspondence with us. And, that's something we're very much aware of. We've got a lot of clients that have net zero commitments. We're seeing some of our peer banks making net zero commitments. And net zero commitments in banking go obviously beyond our carbon footprint as an organization, but look more deeply at scope 3 emissions in our lending and looking at how do we look at our lending portfolio and the carbon embedded in our lending portfolio, and how do we actively manage that. So I think that's an important direction that we're seeing in the banking sector. And that's being driven, by investors, regulators, and others, asking a lot of questions, and NGOs asking questions about this topic. And the banking sector seeing that they can play a really important role in the transition to the low carbon economy or the net zero economy. I found as we have with a lot of different stakeholders is, we all agree on the term. I guess there's debate around the pace and the scale of which it's happening. That's where we see that there's probably a difference in stakeholder opinions on this. Obviously, GASP was looking for some rapid movements on banks trying to divest of the fossil fuel industry and things like that. I think our approach is to work with a lot of our clients in carbon intensive industries and talk to them about the transition pathways they can take so they can be successful in the future. There's a lot of important sectors in the Canadian economy that are key to our prosperity that we want to see them succeed in the future too. And we're certainly not going to walk away from a lot of our major clients in that regard. So I think that's one of the areas that, there's a difference of opinion here. But I'm really encouraged by the activities the bank has taken recently, and I can share some of those. And we're also in a little bit of a...
Before you do that, that was just really a question to see if we're on the same page when it comes to the science and the projections of the UN, because we're missing the boat on a lot of our targets everywhere, all around the world. There are very few jurisdictions or companies or whatever that are on target. So anyway, thanks for that. And I know we're going to get into some more of that detail. I just wanted to see if you're in agreement with that.
Yeah, the science, it's so important. And we also, see that the world is not progressing on its commitments as quickly as we should be if we're going to, stop some of the more dire consequences of climate change. And that's a reality we're facing now. I mean, Canada is not doing well against their targets either. So, but it's a collective problem that, banks, corporates, and people in their personal lives have a responsibility to try to move this forward, and government as well. So I can share some things that we're doing from our perspective that I think will be encouraging. And talk a little bit about what we're planning this year.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt again, but I think Lorraine would like to ask a couple more questions, and then
Sure.
if we get into the detail, that would be great. I'm sorry to interrupt, and I'm sorry for the static you're getting, but some of
it's okay. This sounds good on my side, so maybe it's me.
Okay, back to you, Lorraine.
Hey, thanks, Liz. I as mentioned earlier in our introduction, I don't really get a sense of urgency around anything that RBC has sent to us or is talking about. I refer to the special climate report that the UN put out, and it warned that the global greenhouse gas emissions must be cut by over 50%. We don't even know if that's going to work, if we even get that far. But 2050 is too far. It's not a target goal that it is attainable if we're going to save our planet. So I'd like to know, where is RBC's sense of urgency in all of this? I'll pass it over to any one of you that wants to answer.
Yeah, and that's a great question. I can give you a sense of what's been happening internally over the last couple of years that's shown how the importance of this topic has really accelerated and escalated in the organization. The governance of it, some of the working groups that we have has really raised the profile of this work and really helped to educate the organization, on how we need to manage this risk, but also the incredible revenue opportunity that exists with financing the low carbon transition. Like that is really an opportunity of growth in this, emerging economy where growth opportunities are far and few between. So I can talk a little bit about that, and then I can talk a little bit about our plans moving forward. And I understand that maybe the urgency isn't so much reflected in some of the statements we make online. I think we're very careful about what we publish and what we put out there in the marketplace. And decisions around that go all the way up to our C-suite, to make decisions, and we have regular interactions with them on this topic. And we are planning to make some more announcements this year that I think will help in some ways with some of the questions you have. Some of the stuff I just can't share yet because we're still going through the approvals process. But let me share what maybe we've been working on recently, and hopefully that would help. Would that make sense?
Oops, sorry. Yeah, that would be useful.
Okay.
Well, we looked at the announcement that TD Bank came up with last November, and is RBC considering coming up with something like that, or hopefully better? Because again, even in TD's announcements, there were no definite timelines, no targets. That was all being postponed. And these postponements, we just can't keep having them. I mean, there has to be a target and a timeline attached to these announcements, not just all this gobbledygook stuff.
Right. Okay. So I see what you're saying there. Yeah. So, interesting, some of the banks and some of the net zero commitments they're putting out there. And you're right. There's not a lot of banks saying what they're going to do in the near term to address this. Net zero targets to 2050 are pretty common now. But credibility really is like, what are you going to do in the next 1, 2, 3 years to advance those ambitions, right? It's not pushing out a target way far like that and sitting back. And I think we've been trying to be very thoughtful about how we come to market and address the concept of net zero and what can we say about it. And I think we've been a little bit slower to do it because we do see that we need to disclose what our plans are over the near term to do that and be a little bit clearer about that, because yes, the credibility comes from what are you doing now and how are you investing in this and what are you doing around this. So I think that's really important. I would say recently we've seen a significant escalation in the governance of this topic in the organization. The board is hungry for updates and on climate, ESG in general. And we talked to them at numerous points in the years on these topics. And that didn't happen like 4 or 5 years ago. I mean, so we have board engagement. We have an executive-led working group with 2 executive like C-suite leaders that co-chair that work. So we have a top-down approach to this, and that top-down approach is really driving the business side of this. How are we developing an enterprise risk appetite on climate change? How are you managing the risk? And how are we using finance and investments to help to drive capital to the low carbon transition? And how can we do that? By helping our clients along the way. And with that, we're trying to look at how can we differentiate ourselves? Like how do we invest in data and analytics to understand these topics? Because it is very complex. And maybe that's a bit of the hesitations by banks, like incorporating climate factors into traditional risk management processes is very complex. We need to make sure we have the right data. We need to move forward as an industry too. There's a lot of collaboration amongst banks on how we're going to do that. And you might have seen a recent announcement that the Bank of Canada and our regulator, OFC, is working with us and TD Bank and some other insurance companies and pension plans to determine do work on climate scenario analysis, to standardize that in Canada and figure out what that looks like in the financial institution sector. So our regulators are getting involved. Our peer banks, we're all kind of jumping into some of these clubs that are out there. You talked a little bit about PCAF. That's an interesting one where they're sort of coming up with standard methodologies to measure finance emissions in your lending portfolio. So we're looking closely at that. And there's other initiatives where, banks are working with sectors to determine low carbon transition pathways that, for different sectors of the economy. And I think that's a really important thing too. Like, what are the steps, the incremental steps that different sectors can take so that they can demonstrate that they're in alignment with the agreements of the Paris Agreement. And that can help us inform how do we set up our lending portfolios and how do we look at different sectors. So it's complex. It takes a lot of tools and analytics and investments and data that we need to do. And that's a lot of the work that's happening right now. And we are talking about what our plans forward will be with that information, and we're hoping to share that in 2021.
Thank you for that, Andrew. It all sounds really great. I guess I'm still a little concerned that we've known for many, many years about this climate crisis. And again, it shouldn't be taking this long to establish your risk assessments. The tools have been out there for years, but I hope that somehow RBC can accelerate this process and really get moving quickly. So I'm going to pass it back over to Liz for another question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Thank you. I would add that, I've been an RBC client for many, many years. My father worked forever at a place called Guaranteed Trust, and it was taken over by Canada Trust, which was then taken over by TD. So my RBC business actually went to TD because I had a giant mortgage there and I needed a big line of credit. But I would also add to what Lorraine was saying, I understand, and you probably saw me disappear. I didn't hear the first part of what you said to the last question, but I would say TD came out with a pretty good plan in November. It's 2050 net zero, and we all want that to happen more quickly. But we know that RBC has been working behind the scenes very hard. Why can't you come up with something that gives us a little bit of hope in a sense? RBC, reading all of your reports, they sound so great, but honestly, where's the beef? So, and TD actually, who I've been corresponding with a lot, has responded in a sort of a more specific way to our question.
Yeah, and I was stating before, and sorry if you missed it, but the net zero commitments that a lot of our peer banks are making, we're certainly very aware of that, and we're looking what that means for RBC as well. But what we were talking about is, a commitment around net zero in 2050. Credibility comes from, what are you going to do in the next few years in the near term, not really about making that type of commitments, because it's pretty much, I would say, table stakes now in most industries, net zero commitments around what your plans on climate. But that's what we're working on, is our near-term plan, and we want to share details of that this year. And I think there'll be content that'll be shared at our AGM, that's in April, and throughout the year. And these aren't points in time. This is a complete journey that we're on, we're going to have to be doing regular updates on our climate strategy and how we're proceeding. And we do that through a number of vehicles. We can do that through our TCFD report, as well as, our CEO, who I would say in the banking sector is one of the most energy and climate literate CEOs in the banking sector in Canada. And it really has a passion for looking to drive that narrative about the importance of the low carbon transition as an area of economic growth for Canada and for where we operate around the world. So yeah, I think, you might be pointing to the TD commitments. Yeah, I'll give them credit for being first in the market for a Canadian bank for saying they'll be net zero. But yeah, we're looking at that too as well, and we'll be coming out with our approach to net zero this year.
So here's something that we became familiar with in the Banking on Climate reports, which was there's one thing to be having existing loans in support of existing fossil fuel projects, but the real measure of a bank or a financial institution is, and the danger is in a lot of these expansion projects. Our atmosphere is already super saturated with carbon dioxide and methane, et cetera, et cetera. We can't afford to add more capacity. And that December 2020 report, which I'm sure you've seen, called 5 Years Lost, names the Royal Bank of Canada as one of the top 20 funders of 12 proposed mega fossil fuel projects. And it adds, if these are built and commissioned, there'll be no staying under 1.5, no long-term future for coastal cities, no hope that large parts of the world will remain at livable temperatures, no hope of forests avoiding mega droughts and fires, no survival for coral reefs if these mega projects come to be. And it said Royal Bank is 20th of these huge financial organizations and institutions that are funding these projects. So it does not jibe that a bank that professes to be en route to becoming carbon neutral to continue adding, being the enabler of adding more fossil fuel capacity. It doesn't make sense. It's like pouring gasoline onto a fire. I'm wondering what your comment is about that.
Yeah, the report, there's a number of NGO reports out that talk about banks and their financing for the energy sector and the fossil fuel sector. We have a lot of clients in that sector. We're proud of a lot of our relationships with energy companies. I would say that we're seeing a lot of energy companies in Canada, in the US, talk more openly about climate and the transition to low carbon economy and what their strategies are there. And, we believe our role is to help them in that transition. What activities, how can we support them through what we do best, finance, investment advice on how they can succeed in the low carbon future. So I think there's a lot of interesting activities happening in the Canadian sector. We issued a paper recently on the opportunities around carbon capture and storage through RBC Economics as a means to reduce emissions in Canada for the energy sector and other sectors that are carbon intensive. We're actively involved in driving, conversations around transition pathways for different sectors. I think maybe one area that, there could be disagreement between different groups is, again, the pace and scale of the transition and the continuing need that, fossil fuels will be an important part of the economy, in the near term future. But, knowing that, we need to produce those resources with less emissions, and we need to see that industry transition over time. So that's something that we're actively involved in. We're driving conversations in thought leadership positions on that. So I think I see what you're saying from that perspective. One thing I would maybe point out, and I think we sent you the document, we do have some of our policy restrictions for different sensitive business activities that we published in August. And it does have some of our restrictions related to the financing of new coal mines and new coal power plants. It also talks about, some of the clients and some of the activities that we will support who are involved in the coal sector. So it's very clearly what we will and will not do in that document, as well as our position on not financing any resource development in the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge. And I think we were the first Canadian bank to put out such a statement. So there are some policy restrictions that we do have around the fossil fuel financing. And, that'll be continuing evolution of our climate risk appetite when thinking about, what activities we'll be involved in and what we will support.
Okay, I think there was in the terms of policy scores of last Banking on Climate Change 2020, all of the Canadian banks scored less than 3 out of 300 points. So I think your coal policy, perhaps in your Arctic policy, will put RBC up a notch, but every bank that is studied by Banking on Climate Change scores under 100 out of 300. And the 5 Canadian banks, TD was still ahead, but maybe as I say, your new policies will grab you a point or two, but there's no clear policy enunciated on so many important issues. So I hope that too is part of what you will start to share with us as the year goes on. I think that's really important. But thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Can I
Andrew,
ask
could I just?
Oh, sure. Yeah, Andrew.
Sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to jump in just to supplement some of Andrew's comments, and as he talked about sort of that transition work that's underway and working with, even on the renewable side and all that. And just to mention that within the capital market division, we actually have a team, a dedicated team that we call our sustainable finance group. And they work with, they're kind of an expertise or their expert group and work across the board with our client groups in all sectors, particularly energy. And a fair bit of focus as well with the energy, like oil and gas companies on, what Andrew talked about with that transition work. So how do those companies, reduce their carbon output, reduce the intensity of that carbon output as well. So understand, to what Andrew said about that transition piece and getting there, they're doing a lot of that work directly with clients. So there is like a dedicated team there focused on all of that sort of work.
Okay.
That's a great point, Andrew. And maybe I just add there that, because of our size, we're a very large global financial institution. And, by the nature of our size, yes, we do have large exposures to lots of different sectors of the economy, including the energy sector. But due to that size too, there's a lot of great things that have happened in the sense that, we are, a Canadian leader in the green bond market in issuing and underwriting green bonds. We've been #1 since 2014. We're at the forefront of emissions trading. We've got an emissions trading team in capital markets, and they've helped clients by trading over 2.3 billion tons of carbon over the last decade. And we've got, an amazing responsible investment team and global asset management that is actually has published a lot of papers on their approach to climate change and how they incorporate ESG factors into investment decision making and setting up portfolios and their beliefs on climate. So the size, yes, it does maybe presents us as having more exposure to the energy sector than some of our peers, but it also allows us to be big supporters for some of the transition activities and some of the industries that are really important, like renewable energy and the clean tech sector.
Thanks. I'm just going to continue for a moment because I see we've lost Sally and she was going to ask the next question, but I guess to go back, Andrew, to the 5 years lost report, RBC seems to have a lot of skin in the game for these new mega projects. And do you agree or not that we can't afford to pump way more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. What these reports say, and maybe they're wrong, but if all of the fossil fuels already in production are burnt, we'll go way past 1.5. We'll go back past 2 degrees Celsius. So I guess the question again is, when are you going to start backing off these new projects?
Yeah, we don't have, beyond what's available on our website, we don't have any disclosed plans about our decreasing role with supporting the energy sector. So I think that's something that's clear. I'm not sure exactly which of the mega projects, and I can't speak directly to any specific climate relationships, but yeah, I mean, to our points before, I think I think we are very active in driving that conversation with clients around the transition and the conversation around sustainable finance as an area of business growth. We do have our $100 billion sustainable financing target. That's great at financing a lot of companies that are helping drive towards the low carbon economy. And we're continuing to see our energy clients make investments in reducing their own energy footprint and reducing the amount of embedded energy and carbon in every unit of energy that they're creating. So a lot of encouraging things there. Canada has a price on carbon. We're seeing the U.S. government come into place with a new in vogue to talk about Paris again in the U.S. So that's great to see them jumping back on that international agreement and wanting to look at a green economic recovery for their economy as well as we're seeing that in Canada. So I'm really encouraged about what's going to happen over the next few years in driving this, the low carbon transition as an area of growth for Canada and an area of prosperity.
Okay. Again, I think we need to come back to the very specifics of looking at those mega projects and getting an answer on what your plan is about them.
Yeah.
But
no, we haven't set any targets or dates to move away from the fossil fuel sector. Just to be clear, whatever is on our website is the only commitments that we've made so far. And we are pointing to those around the coal sector. But beyond that, we haven't made any announcements or shared any plans in that regard.
So, but are those coming?
As I said, there's going to be continuing announcements, moving forward on this topic, because we know it's so important and important to so many stakeholders. So there'll be more announcements on what we're doing around net zero, how we're activating on this, how we're looking at it as a growth opportunity. And those will be coming out every year moving forward. So we'll be happy to share those plans with you when they come to market.
Okay.
Andrew, could I just jump in, if you don't mind, just quick and maybe just add a bit on there as well. So one thing to consider in there with, and I don't want to focus on that report or the projects, but just speaking more generally is, there's a high degree of due diligence that occurs with any projects that RBC does or is involved with in terms of financing, that sort of thing. There's a lot of due diligence that goes in, working very closely with those companies who are financing that or who are building that project, I should say, on their plans in terms of how they're going to minimize their carbon outputs, their environmental impact, all of that sort of thing. So there's quite a bit of work that goes in on that project level. And as Andrew talked about with that, that transition piece, there is obviously a number of opposing views on the way to go about that in terms of meeting current energy needs and getting towards that sort of low carbon future, meeting those commitments as well. So just to add a bit in there, but how they look at those projects, there's a fair degree of diligence that goes into that and building that, building those factors in.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. Carol, maybe we'll turn it over to you now for your question. You just have to unmute yourself, Carol. Carol? You have to unmute yourself.
I am unmuted.
Okay.
It keeps saying that my internet is unstable.
Okay.
Anyhow, I have the last question, and it's a personal one. You've been hearing that unless we individuals in the world take an unprecedented action to sharply reduce greenhouse gases this decade, starting this minute, our children and our grandchildren are going to face far worse climate calamity, far worse than COVID. We've seen nothing when it gets to climate change and runaway climate change. And so I have a question for you, and it is about, do you share the same sense of alarm as we do? I do sense it in you, Andrew, Craig, and that's great. But it's more than that. You are going to face your children and your grandchildren, and they will surely ask, what did you do when you knew about the climate crisis? Because you see, we're at the age where we have grandchildren, and they are asking us right now those questions. I want to quote my 15-year-old granddaughter, Vegan at 14. She's now 15. And here's what she says. Mammy, that's me. She says, Mammy, you and your generation, you didn't even care about my generation. I'm Generation Z. That's the last generation. And you have left us an unsafe, I'm quoting, unhealthy planet. I have to put my glasses on. You've polluted the air, the water, the soil. There's mass extermination, extinction of animals, especially my favorite, polar bears and bees. Your generation used up all the resources without caring about the people that came after you. For why? For your pleasure, for your greed. She yells out greed. You left us to clean up your mess. It's not fair. She makes Greta Thunberg just a very mild little child compared to my 15-year-old. Wait, RBC Bank, when you have to deal with her and just her sweet little granny here. So this is my question. As a banker, what promise will you make to your grandchildren about your commitment to the future?
Oh, that was an amazing statement from your granddaughter. Thanks for the pictures there too of your granddaughters. I mean, I have children too, and I've been in the sustainability space at university. I was at the University of Guelph, took natural resources management, envirosci programs, all the way through my career. I've been in this. And I would say I was, early in my career, I was very attracted to the topic of climate change. And I actually went to Europe to find a master's program that specialized in climate at Imperial College. And through my career, that is the work I've been doing. And what I see as an interesting, what's attracted me to the largest financial institution in Canada is the scale that we can take on addressing this challenge. And I'm just my team is working really hard on driving that and driving us to create positive environmental and social change on a number of fronts. And I see that scale that RBC has, and I do see our leaders, this is top of mind in so many different conversations. And it's really exploded in the last 2 years. The pandemic, if there is any silver lining to the pandemic, it's that corporations need to have much more relevance in environmental and social issues to be relevant to the stakeholders that they serve. And I think that's just being embedded and ingrained in your organization. There's not questions about, is this the right thing to do? It's just questions about how are we going to do it, and how are we going to do it better, and how are we going to help our clients through this process. So I'm really encouraged by that. And in my personal life, this is something I talk to my kids about, and they bring up the same questions. They're a little bit younger, so maybe not as much passion yet in them, but I do look at them and I am worried. I am worried about their future. The change that we're going to see in the next couple of decades will be unprecedented from a climate perspective. But at least I can say, you know, I've dedicated my career to working on this, and hopefully at some point we can look back and say that RBC had an incredible role in helping to accelerate the low carbon transition and helping our clients do that and helping Canada achieve its climate goals. So anyways, that's what I would share. And I don't know if maybe some of the other team members would want to share some perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, I totally echo that. And I'm not Gen Z, but I am a millennial. And even in my short professional career, I've seen such a huge change. My first degree was in business, and I was one of, I think, 5 or 6 students that chose to specialize in sustainable business. And just the attraction to this field that in the last like 15 years, you know, we were considered these like fringe hippies, like no one took us seriously. And, you know, it's given me so much hope just to see like the intense focus on these issues and the consideration of them, not as like bleeding heart external considerations, but like real fundamental questions of business risk and other like things that are core to what companies need to think about. And I, like Andrew, came to this role because I saw Canada's largest financial institution as the gatekeeper of all of these possibilities. You know, like if we turn off the taps, then suddenly, you know, different industries have to behave differently. And so I was attracted to this job because of the impact potential of it. And, you know, when I was in law school, I was mentored by an amazing professor who is now the Canada Research Chair on Human Rights and the Environment. And he was the one that told me to go work in the private sector. He said there's not enough of communication between civil society and the private sector on these issues. And there's really a need for people that are able to speak both languages to kind of connect and bridge that gap. And so this type of engagement that we're doing right now, like I just want to tell you, it is incredibly useful and impactful. And yeah, like personally, I think about climate change all the time. I'm 32 years old and I've had the conversation with my partners to whether we should have children, you know, because what kind of future will they have? And that's an awful thing to have to think about. So yeah, I can promise you that personally, our whole team is just, you know, so motivated on this topic.
I was going to conclude, but I want to give you a chance. No, Andrew Block.
Sure. Yeah, I'll be very brief. And I don't have the background that Andrew and Audrey do in terms of on the sustainability side, but I joined the bank about seven years ago. It had previously spent about 6 or 7 years in politics and government. So really passionate on that sort of public service side and how we can make a difference. And I would say from, you know, for me personally, being engaged on a topic like this is very important, and one that I probably spend more time on than, you know, than any other topic, and working on this. And maybe 2 comments just about why, for me, being at, you know, with RBC and sort of on this, why it's important is there's a genuine, so 2 things on that. So one, there's a genuine connection that we have and wanting to sort of really make a difference on these topics. And it's not just about, you know, from a PR lens or anything like that. There's a genuine commitment. And Andrew mentioned the commitment we made last year on the Arctic and coal financing, and that we wouldn't finance in the ANWR and you know, limited what we were doing, very prescribed on coal. And I can tell you, like across the board, there was support when we brought those policies forward. There wasn't a debate about, you know, whether we should do it or not. It was about getting the language, the wording, the policy right. I know some of the comments we heard today were around, you know, when are you going to come out with those commitments? And we definitely hear you on that. What I'd say from RBC's end, there's just a deep commitment to make sure we also get those policies right, and that we make sure they're making a big difference. And I'd say from our end too, like there's just, I've noticed in especially the last 2 years, a genuine commitment to how can we make the most difference. So how do we work with our clients to, you know, help them meet some of their climate goals, work with companies in the renewable space, work with companies on, you know, so battery powered cars. So we worked with GM recently and a company on a partnership for battery charging across the US, which is a huge deal. So there's a genuine commitment and genuine push behind it. I think Andrew talked about it at the beginning, that it's not just a PR piece, there's a business imperative to it as well. And the final point I would just say from our is that, you know, I think for a number of years, groups like Andrew's and where Andrew and Audrey said, that sustainability group, corporate citizenship, that was sort of, you know, part of the banks, but they were sort of not maybe as integrated. I can tell you they're very integrated, and they're listened to across the bank. And, you know, our bankers all, you know, look to Andrew and Audrey for their advice and support. So there, you know, there's genuine integration and commitment, I would say.
Well, I just want to thank you very, very much for this discussion. I want to say from GASP, I'm a co-chair of the GASP. And I want to say, I think we're allies. I believe you are allies inside the system. And I hope there are many more of you duplicates all throughout your system, because there needs many more of you, Ray. And so you're going to fight from the inside. You know, the messages we are giving about urgency, about right now, about real numbers. You can't have another report that doesn't give us those things. You have to have them in there, because it is a credibility thing for you. We are going to continue as grassroots grandmothers. There's only 80 of us, but we have legs and touching everywhere, because there's no more compelling argument than grandparents caring about the next generation, especially because we are culpable. We have to say what we did, why we endangered it, and we have to take it. And so we owe those kids, all of us. And so we're going to keep working. And at not the professional level you are, but at our level, grassroots with other people. And we want to be able to brag about RBC, our bank, my bank as well. And right now, we're not into bragging about it.
Mm-hmm.
We'd like to be able to. Wow. And I hope that, well, I think it's positive, and we want to keep communications open, and you should keep talking to grassroots groups like us as well. Sometimes the professionals, you know, they forgot that they have children and grandchildren that they're going to be held accountable for.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, thank you very much for this.
Yes, thank you. And your passion is contagious, I would say. It's incredible. And keep doing what you're doing. And we want to keep those dialogues open. We want to keep the communications lines open, and look forward to providing you with updates this year. And, you know, we can schedule another conversation further down the road too as well.
Right.
May I just add one final thing? How do we go about helping you? How can we continue to try and help you to make this go forward even faster? I mean, what do you see are the pressure points to the bank to help it go faster?
I'll say that your postcards get people's attention. They've been working, and that's helpful. Like, you know, hearing feedback at the senior level is important. You know, at a certain point, you know, the postcards, they get attention, you know, they're usually sent back to the team right here, and, you know, we respond to them as best we can. But you're going to continue to get a little bit of the same response back that we've been providing before, until we can update you on what's next. And then we want you to come back and provide feedback on what our next iteration of our plan is. And that's how, you know, continuous improvement. You know, tell us what areas you're concerned in, and we get it. You know, it's the fossil fuel sector you're really focused on. But yeah, your feedback is important, and it does help. Yeah.
So we should send you a Valentine card?
For sure.
I just wanted to add, you know, I'm an ex-RBC employee from many years ago, and an RBC client for over 60 years. I want RBC to really be the leader in above all other financial institutions. So please don't take away my hope in RBC. And thank you. Thank you all for this great meeting, and I hope we can continue to chat.
Yes, thank you very much. And I want RBC to be a global leader as well. So thank you for that. Yeah. And I got to jump to a meeting, another
these
meeting on
guys.
climate change. Yeah.
Thank you again.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We wanted to show you our kids.
They're very cute.
Hang on, hang on, hang on. It was-
They're gone.
Aw.
Thank
Still
you.
There's these are my great grandkids.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I'm a generation behind.
Ah.
Well, that's a few years ago, but
Oh.
Beautiful,
they're a
beautiful.
little bigger now. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so
Okay.
much, Andrew. Thank you, Audrey.
Thank
Our
you.
pleasure. Take care.
Bye-bye.
They talk about working to reduce, the footprint of all of these heavy oils like bitumen, which are hugely more polluting than, other kinds of even, oil and gas. I mean, twice, 3 times as shitty. Anyway, so, I come away with it that I think we have made a nice connection with these people. I think it was a step in the right direction. I'm not so convinced that they're doing what they could be, frankly. I think they're also that they've got so many irons in the fire in terms of new projects and certainly tar sands and stuff. So I don't know. I found them, and I got cut off, Sally, as you probably noticed, just as Andrew was starting to answer. So I look forward to hearing the recording to hear exactly what he said.
Yeah.
Because okay, sorry.
Yeah, no, the Zoom transposes the recording into a something I can send you. So as soon as they do that, it's a slow process, but as soon as they've completed it, I'll send it to all of you and you can review it again,
Sorry, go ahead, Carol. I'll go after you.
Oh, I was just going to say, I did not expect any concrete statements from them because they don't have them. And it's middle management. Probably even the CEO is probably hesitant to give anything concrete. But I think our message got across. I think in the way we were and how professional they were with us.
Yeah.
I think that our message of urgency, of having numbers, don't come out with something that has no numbers because it questions your credibility. He said that a couple times.
Yeah.
That the credibility. So, I mean, he's working. He probably still wants a job. He's a father. So I don't know. I'm not as disappointed as you are, Liz, because maybe my standards were lower. I just expected, would they listen? Would they hear us? And I think they did. And I think our postcards really worked when he mentioned it ahead of us. I was waiting for that. So don't be so rough on yourself, Liz. It was really good. You started this and we're doing good things and it's moving, not fast enough, but it's moving. I'm just giving a little less lecture, Liz.
Yeah.
Liz, one thing I thought, I liked Andrew Craig very much. One thing I thought he completely evaded, though, was your question about the one of the top banks on those mega projects. He didn't really answer that at all. I mean, that's billions of dollars they're committing to expansion. And I noticed he did not answer that.
Let's follow up with asking that question specifically.
Yeah.
Because I agree.
I don't think he knows. I don't think he knows about it.
Well, I think it's up to them.
About it, wouldn't know how to answer it because that would have to come from top down.
Totally.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you where for me, it's like a great leap forward. But considering what poor Lorraine got back as a result of her first mailing, I mean, that was so bad.
Yeah.
So I think least we're on their
Letter.
radar now, and we can actually ask, as a result of this meeting, we can ask your question, Sally, because I think it was critical to include. But we can ask it probably in a more pointed way once we get the transcript or whatever. But I think they, and we didn't say it, but I think they might well expect, we have their emails now,
Yeah, we do.
that there would be follow, thanking them, and here are some follow-up questions we have for you.
Yeah.
Now, they may not know, but I think we could, I'd like to go back to the 5 years lost report and say, yeah, you're on the list for several projects that not only are mega projects, but they're in violation of Indigenous rights. They're moving people off the land, et cetera, et cetera. So, without being too hectoring, to say, these are the specific projects that you're named in. Is this in fact true? But
Yeah.
to me, the expansion question is still out there. They didn't answer. So.
No.
Yeah, I think we ask it again for sure.
Yeah.
That's the one I really noticed he evaded.
Mhm.
Well, I was on. I don't know what happened when I wasn't.
No,
We're doing good work, people. We're doing good work. God, we're just a bunch of grandmothers. I didn't want Sally to speak because I want, you never let us get introduced, Lorraine. Because Sally's got these criteria as being a risk manager, blah, blah, blah,
well, maybe when we send the follow-up letter, we can put
Sally's credentials.
Well, we'll put all our names, yeah, but Sally's credentials for sure,
And I was going to start by saying I'm not Larry, I'm Sally. Unfortunately, Larry, I don't know why Larry. I come up as Larry on this computer because he has his own computer.
Yeah, they all think you're Larry.
Sensitive debate now with all the non-gendered and everything. My grand Calliope'd have a huge problem if anybody questioned your name. Oh my God.
I know.
So do you want me to write another press release?
No, don't you dare.
Don't you dare.
God, that was upsetting.
If you get a bucket of coal delivered to your front door today, you'll know it comes from me.
Very
Another,
good. Very good, people. Lorraine, you're going to have a good, Lorraine or Liz, I don't know who, will have to have a report for the GASP meeting on Thursday.
Yeah, which is tomorrow.
tomorrow. Question for you. I know I raised it before, but in a more limited, focused way, do you think it would be a good idea to have, obviously we're too late for Valentine's, but to have some kind of what is coming up are the AGMs in April. So maybe an April Fool's card, like we don't want to be treated like fools or something, like treat us with respect to, something that comes up before their AGMs.
Yeah.
Because that's what Bankswitch says. Those are critical moments. And I know that it was a huge and expensive effort on GASP's part to do the 1,000 cards, but maybe there's 50 cards we can send or 150 cards we can send that are very focused on coming events. I'm still shocked really that RBC hasn't said something other than that. I laid off Dirty Dozen stuff, but what kept in my mind was with their coal and Arctic policy. Those are baby steps and they're weak.
Yeah, they're pittance compared to what they invest. Yeah.
Thank you for, I think you were all probably really scared that I was going to be a maniac.
No.
We're all maniacs in our own way,
Yeah, we are.
I think it was all good and it's a step forward. That's how I see it.
Yeah, I agree.
And maybe your idea of a card, Liz, could center around Earth Day.
Yeah.
Which is in April.
Yeah, their AGMs are ahead of that. I think they're earlier in April.
They're usually earlier for the AGM.
But we could, send it earlier, but, center it around. You have an opportunity before Earth Day to do something for the earth.
Maybe because of the cost. I know everybody never worries about the cost, but maybe a much more targeted, maybe to each CEO kind of card.
Yeah,
You
and the
know?
executives and all the
Or
executives.
just the boards or something.
Yeah.
You know, I suspect that all those board members, they pass those cards down to Andrew.
Yeah.
I bet you he's got 1,000 cards on his desk because
Yeah.
of course, he said, fix this, get rid of this.
Yeah.
You know, we sent a lot to TD, Liz. I've got to jump off, but we should have a similar meeting with TD.
Yes.
I'll see. I'll follow up. It's still in the ombudsman's office. but
Yeah. Yeah.
I know who the ombudsman is. She's coming up with her kids on the weekend.
Oh, okay. Because a lot of the responses from TD that our people got were referring them to the ombudsman.
Yeah.
The hierarchy.
Yeah. Yeah. Pass the buck.
I'm going to tell TD that we had this meeting with RBC, that we'd like to have a similar meeting with the same kind of, staffers.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah,
I
much
think
more.
that's a good idea. You keep kind of pushing one against the other and say,
Yeah.
that's doing
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. I wouldn't tell them the level that we met with. The people we met with, it'd be just interesting to see who TD would send us to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Rather than say, well, we had the marketer of, because we just don't want just the marketer of TD. Do you know what I mean?
I suspect, well,
Let's see what they would, if we can set up a meeting, let's see who they send us, I guess is the word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who can.
I've got to jump off, but thank you. so much.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. It was great. Thanks for all your help.
Yeah.
No more fictional notes from you, Liz.
Bye.
Bye. Are you okay?